So next I want to give you an overview of photosynthesis. And we'll spend a lot more time in class going on the very gory details of it, looking at each part. But for right now, just as a review, we know that photosynthesis is the process of an organism making its own food through the use of sunlight. Okay, and so for that reason we have the equation of photosynthesis being that you have carbon dioxide plus, moves on to the next one. So we have carbon dioxide plus water with the help of sunlight making glucose and oxygen. Okay? And I think we went through that in class. So here's the general flow chart. You have light energy coming from the sun, and that hits the plant, specifically a part of the plant that's called the thylakoid, and we'll go through what the structure actually looks like in just a little bit. And then you have what we call a light-dependent reaction happening. So you need to have sunlight for this, and you need to have water. What happens is that in this reaction, oxygen is produced, and ATP and something of NADPH is made. Then we have the next step of the process where carbon dioxide is required with, again, water, and this is happening in the Calvin cycle, which we call the located specifically in the stroma, and that makes your actual glucose. And in addition to that, it requires some energy to make that. So remember, ATP is where we stored that energy. To have this cycle happen, it requires energy, and so that ATP becomes ADP, which is the one that just has two phosphates. And then it goes back into the cycle. Okay, so let's just go through that one more time. The sunlight hits part of the plant cell called the thylakoid, and we'll go through what that structure looks like shortly. Water is required for that. As a product, we have oxygen. ATP is made in that reaction along with something else that's called NADPH. Then with the help of carbon dioxide, or carbon dioxide is required to make the next step happen, which we can also call the dark reaction, is the Calvin cycle, which takes place in the stroma. That produces the sugar, and as a result you now have that ATP converted into NADP, and it's ready to start again. So in order to capture that sunlight, we need to have specific pigments, and that pigment is called chlorophyll, and I'm sure most of you have heard of it before. Chlorophyll is something that is very unique in that it's a chemical that actually can absorb light. And there are two types of chlorophyll. There's chlorophyll A and there's chlorophyll B. And the cool thing about chlorophyll A and B is that they actually absorb wavelengths of light. For example, chlorophyll B here absorbs violet light and blue light, and chlorophyll A absorbs orange reddish light. What they don't absorb is green light, and that's why plants are green, because they reflect that green light. The violet and blue are absorbed thanks to chlorophyll chlorophyll B, and in the red spectrum of light, it's chlorophyll A that absorbs that. Okay, and this is where I'm going to pause. One second. So I talked a little bit about the general process of photosynthesis, and now I want to focus on where this actually takes place. So I have my plant, and then if I look closely, I have my plant cells right here. And if I look in those plant cells, and we've seen those under the microscope already, there are these small little bubbles which are called chloroplasts, and this is actually a real picture of what that looks like. And if I were to magnify this chloroplast, it would be like this small sort of M&M, okay? And inside this M&M, we have these little pill, kind of squashed pill things, all right? These are called a thylakoid. Each of those is a thylakoid, and they are in the chloroplast. That's what this structure is called. And remember, and this thylakoid is in a big cell. So these thylakoids are arranged in stacks known as grana. So this whole stack of thylakoids is considered a grana, or a singular is granum. And inside these thylakoids, we have these clusters of pigment, which include chlorophyll and other pigments, and those are called the photosystems. So this is on the very outer surface here where those chemicals are that collect light that I had talked about earlier. Okay, so here's the general flow of it. We have, in this case, sunlight hitting the cell. It then hits the chloroplast, and we know that water is moved into the cell thanks to it moving through osmosis. And into the whole process, into these thylakoids, we have ADP with a phosphate coming in and NADPH. Okay, and then all these ingredients come in and a light reaction, dependent reaction happens. And we'll go through that in much more detail later on. All right, as a result, you have oxygen being released, and that ADP becomes ATP thanks to that light energy that has formed that into to now a energy storage chemical. And we have NADP becoming NADPH. So what happens next? So what happens next is carbon dioxide comes in, and you notice that the carbon dioxide and this whole process is not happening in the thylakoids. It's actually happening in the center of the chloroplast, and it requires carbon dioxide, and we have the Calvin cycle happening. And the Calvin cycle essentially is making the sugars as well as using that NADPH as an energy source and the ATP as an energy source, and now it's reverted back to where it is. So that's the general overview. Okay, that is where we're going to stop. Okay, so you have a couple of questions that you'll be answering as a quiz to let me know that you checked the video, and please use your book and repeat this video if you have any questions. Thanks.